right, well, good crowd this morning. Good to see you guys. You glad to be here? Yeah, good. We had a great day yesterday at West Allen High School. Was our Art of Marriage conference. If you didn't get to attend that, you missed just a spectacular event. And I just wanted to share with you some of the results from that, and so we could celebrate as a church and let you know some things that are coming up here in the near future. But out of 35 to 40 couples, that doesn't count our volunteers that we had there yesterday, but out of 35 or 40 couples yesterday, after all of the sessions were over and we got in all of our information, our connection cards and everything, 8 couples had signed up for Marriage Oneness class. That's going to start in November. And so if you're interested in, well, you know, I wasn't able to make the conference, had some things going on, the Marriage Oneness class will go over a lot of the same material and information as the conference, but on a slower pace, a little more detailed pace kind of thing. That's going to start in November. It's only one class a month, and they'll meet here on Saturday morning. So if that's something that you might be interested in, then send us an email, contact us here in the church office, and we'll point you in the right direction of who to get in touch with to be able to be a part of those classes. So we had 8 couples to sign up for that, 2 couples that said they'd be interested in ongoing Art of Marriage life group, which we already have going on right now, just some couples that get together and they focus on and talk about marriage and relationships and family and what they can do to foster that atmosphere. And so if you would like to be a part of that, again, contact us and we'll put you in the right hands. And then best of all, out of the marriage conference yesterday, is we had one person indicate that they began a relationship with Christ yesterday. And so that's something for our church to celebrate. It doesn't seem to matter what we're doing as a church, whether it's an outreach event, a worship service, a marriage conference, kids jam. There are always people here at New Life coming to faith in Christ. And that's something that we need to be excited about, and we always need to be celebrating. And especially right here as it pertains to the series that we've been in. We talk about the marriage conference and move right into our topics today, because for the last 2 weeks, we've been on a journey through the Old Testament book called the Song of Solomon. Now, some people refer to it as the Song of Songs. It's just an 8-chapter book. We're spending 10 weeks, but it is jammed packed with truth about love, about marriage, about relationships. And in 10 weeks, we're only going to scratch the surface of the things that we could actually dive in and talk about. So that's why I would say it would be extremely beneficial to you if during this 10 weeks you would get involved in a life group. Whether that life group meets every week or bi-weekly or once a month, whatever it is, we have groups that meet on all types of schedules. You want to go online and see if that would be something that you could do to fit in. Talk about some of this stuff in a little more in-depth in a small group setting with some people who are like-minded. But this book and this series, I believe, is absolutely going to transform marriages and families in our church if we take the truth to heart and put it into practice. And so a few weeks ago, we were introduced to this couple, Solomon and the Shulamite. They're the main characters of the book. And we don't know the bride-to-be. We don't know her name. She's just referred to as the Shulamite, which is literally translated Solomoness. It's sort of like when people refer to my wife. Her name is Jessica. But everybody will call her, well, that's the preacher's wife. You see what I'm saying? So it's the same thing going on in this book. Well, there's Solomon, and that's Solomoness. That's his wife. Now, they don't get married until the last part of chapter 3 and into chapter 4, but that's how people know her, and we're just not really given her name. But you don't have to read very far into this book to figure out that this couple is absolutely crazy about each other. Head over heels. They're anticipating, they're excited about their life together, and I described it in the first week as a divine love story. And we chose to use their story as a litmus test, sort of set it as a bar to help us determine, is our story a love story? Measured by theirs, is our story a love story? And we asked 4 questions that day to sort of help us determine where our story is. And so if you missed that week, go online. We have all of our messages on YouTube. You can catch back up over the last 2 weeks and just begin to reacclimate yourself to where our church is and what we're going through here. Last week, Trey took us through most of the rest of chapter 1 and really focused on the impact of affirmation, how words play a part in molding your spouse and building them up, the power that is possessed in praising and affirming and encouraging your spouse, and the impact of those words on a relationship. And so this week, I'm just going to finish out chapter 1. We're going to go into chapter 2. And as we go, we're going to go a little deeper into their relationship. And we're going to notice the excitement and the anticipation that is building as they get closer and closer and closer to the day of their wedding, which I said happens at the end of chapter 3. So everything is building to a moment. And we're going to see that here in just a few weeks. But today, the topic is all about intimacy, right? And now I know that for a lot of people, when they hear the word intimacy, the first thing that comes to your mind, and the way many people would spell intimacy, is S-E-X. So that's the first place our minds go, you bunch of dirty thinkers. But that's not what it's all about. Now, for a married couple, intimacy involves a sexual relationship. But that's not everything that makes up intimacy. Intimacy, in fact, is that close and affectionate familiarity that you have with a person that includes a detailed knowledge, a deep understanding of them, their likes, their dislikes, what makes them happy, their fears, their needs, their desires. Intimacy is not something that you just can have between you and any person. We're only intimate with people that we are willing to share the deepest, sometimes the darkest, the most secret things about us. That's what makes intimacy between a husband and wife so special. Because you share things and you experience things with one another that you don't experience or share with anybody else on the planet. Intimacy in a relationship is not something that happens by chance. It has to be worked for. It has to be planned for. It has to be maintained if you're going to experience it over and over and over, and especially for a lifetime. When Jessica and I first started dating, now this has been 18 years ago, ever since then, until just recently, a few years ago, her grandfather passed. Every year, her dad, myself, and her brother-in-law, we would always go up to her grandfather's house in Virginia for a yearly hunting trip. Might be just a few days or an entire week, but it's something we always look forward to because it was just like it was a guy's week. We just enjoyed getting away from everything and everybody. We didn't really care if we came home with any meat or anything. We just needed to sort of get away and relax a little bit and enjoy the outdoors. One of the greatest highlights, one of the things we look forward to the most about the trip, believe it or not, was soup. Poppy's vegetable beef soup. Now, I'm just going to be straight up with you. There was nothing particularly spectacular about it because it was just your basic tomato-based vegetables out of a can and roast stew. That's it. But you would have thought, gauging our reaction to it, that it was the best soup in the world. Because before we ever left on the trip, it's a 5.5-hour drive from here to Craigsville, Virginia. Before we ever got all of our stuff in the car and left, we'd start talking about that soup. And periodically through the drive, we would bring it up. It's over and over as we made our journey from Charlotte to Craigsville. The temperature would begin to drop, and we would stop for gas or for a snack. We'd get out, and the chill would hit us, and we'd be like, oh, man, we're getting ready for that soup. It's going to be... We'd talk about it the entire time, right? And some nights we would get there and be late. It might be 11, 12 o'clock at night, sometimes even later, 1 or 2 in the morning. But we were determined that when we walked through the door, we were going to eat soup. And we knew we would, because it didn't matter how late we arrived, it was going to be there. It was going to be on the stove. It's going to be piping hot, ready for us to eat every single time. And like I said, we would sit down. If it's 2 in the morning, we're going to sit down and have a bowl of soup. And it was the best. Not necessarily because of its taste, but because we had talked about it so much. We had anticipated it. We had just sort of psyched ourselves and hyped ourselves up so much. We had planned for it. So when the moment arrived, it was like, this is the best stuff on the world. You know, it was great. And the same thing happens when you plan for, you anticipate, and experience intimacy with your spouse. And so today, we're going to talk about how to ensure intimacy. Now, if you're an English stickler, you may have already looked into the notes this morning, opened up your series folder, or if you're following along on the Bible app, you may have said, you know, he used the wrong word for insure. Well, maybe not. Let's talk about it for a second. Because insure is one of those words where you can spell it 2 different ways depending upon the message you want to communicate and what you're talking about. You can spell insure with an E, and it means to guarantee or to secure something. Or you can spell it with an I, and it also means it's a guarantee, but it's a guarantee against future or potential loss or harm. You see the difference? Just a slight difference, but it definitely makes a difference. In other words, if I wanted to send you a gift, maybe your birthday's coming up and you lived out of town or out of state or something, I want to send you a gift. And I wanted to insure that gift from damage. I would put it in the box. I would pack it tightly, maybe with some packing peanuts or some newspapers or whatever, so that it couldn't move, it couldn't break, shift in transit or anything like that. I would secure the box. I would tape it up real tight so nobody, hopefully would try to tamper with it or anything. I would try to do everything I could to guarantee that it arrives to you in one piece. But is that going to protect it from loss? Like if I take it down here to the post office or to the UPS store and I hand that package over, is there any guarantee? I've guaranteed that it will arrive in one piece. I've packed it tightly, but where's the guarantee that it will actually arrive? Well, they're going to ask you, do you want to insure it? In other words, we'll assume responsibility if this thing gets lost in transit and doesn't make it to its destination, and we'll replace it. Let's just say it's something extremely valuable. Maybe I got you a nice crystal vase or some jewelry or something. I might package it tightly, and I could insure the package itself so that if in transit it did get lost or damaged, that someone would replace it. But what if once you got it, something happened to it? Like your kids got a hold of it, use it for a football, Or someone broke into your house and stole it. You see, I could insure the item itself against future or potential loss or damage, so that if they did break it, or if someone did come in and take it, we could repair it or replace it. So you see the difference? This couple this morning is going to show us how not just to insure with an E intimacy so that we could experience once. We're not interested in a one-hit wonder, right? We want something that becomes a classic, that we get to enjoy and experience for a lifetime. Well, then, if that's going to happen, you have to insure it. You have to protect it and guarantee it against any future loss or harm. And this couple in this passage here this morning is going to show us how to do that with intimacy. So if you got your Bibles or your Bible app, follow us along in Song of Solomon chapter 1, starting in verse 15. Solomon says, "How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful, your eyes are doves." And she says, "How handsome you are, my beloved, and how charming. Our bed is verdant. The beams of our house are cedars, and our rafters are firs." In verse 1 of chapter 2, she says, "I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys." And he responds, "Like a lily among thorns is my darling among the young women." And she says, "Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. Let him lead me to the banquet hall, and let his banner over me be love. Strengthen me with raisins. Refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. His left arm is under my head, and his right arm embraces me. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires." I was reading recently, those who study marital trends suggest that romance and intimacy should be on the endangered species list for relationships. And there are a lot of contributing factors, but two of them that they point to. One, the rise in cohabitation, those couples who live together before they get married. And two, the rise in something called gray divorce. In the last 50 years, cohabitation among couples has risen, get this, 1,500%. Despite the fact that those who cohabitate before they get married later admit to having less satisfying marriages. And studies have shown that those who live together before they get married are more likely to experience divorce. Gray divorce refers to the rising trend of those who are getting divorced at a later age, 50 years old or older. For the first time in our country's history, right now there are more individuals 50 years old and older who are divorced than they are widowed. You see, those are some factors contributing to and also resulting from a lack of romance and a lack of intimacy in today's relationships and in today's marriages. And trends like these teach us one thing for sure. That since Adam and Eve, men and women haven't changed. We long for love. We long for something that's real. We want something that lasts, but sin has us looking for it in all the wrong places, in all of the wrong ways. And so because of that, we long for intimacy. We long for that close connection with someone, but we're failing to do what it takes to practice intimacy and to preserve it, right? And so today what I think we need to do is to strive to leave here with 3 things that we can do to ensure lifelong intimacy, to guarantee against any future loss or harm intimacy for a lifetime. And now to do that, I just want to follow along in the path that Trey began to take us down last week. And the first thing we need to do to ensure lifelong intimacy is to learn to say the right thing. Learn to say the right thing. In the passage that we read, you'll begin to notice, and it happens all throughout the Song of Solomon, this back and forth dialogue between this couple. Nowhere is it more evident than right here at the end of chapter 1, where Solomon will say one thing and his bride-to-be will say another, and they're just back and forth. It's almost like they're 2 little lovebirds just chirping back and forth. And one will say, "You're so pretty. Oh, but you're so handsome. You're so sweet. You're so charming. And, oh, you're so thoughtful. Oh, you're blah, 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 blah." You know, that's the way it gets. That's the way I hear when I read it. It's like, oh my gosh, right? Just whatever. Like, we laugh about it, but here's the thing. Here's what it teaches us. And it's okay to laugh and have a good time with it. But this has to be captured early in a relationship. It has to be continued throughout. That is clear, healthy, positive communication. We've said that and until we're blue in the face. We've heard it till our ears have grown deaf. Clear, healthy, positive communication is the key to lasting intimacy. You have to learn to say the right thing. Trey highlighted that last week. The power of the words that you speak to your spouse molds and shapes them. And what we see in this couple is that, hurtful, critical, harsh, and coarse words is not in their vocabulary. They don't speak those kinds of words to each other. And that applies this morning, guys, whether you're married or not. Because the Apostle Paul told us in Colossians chapter 4, verse 6, that when we speak to each other, our words should always be gracious and seasoned as with salt. Our words should always be soft, helpful, beneficial, pleasing to the palate. We need to avoid words that cut, that harm, that belittle, and demean. One writer had this to say about communication. He said, there's nothing more painful than having unhealthy communication with the one that you love. It's through communication that we connect and our spirits touch. If that connection becomes contaminated, it's only a matter of time before the whole relationship is poisoned. We're talking about learning to say the right things. That's a wise thing. And just as wise as learning to say the right thing is learning not to say the wrong thing. Right? Out of a list of 27 things not to say to your spouse, one author had, I just picked 4, and I want to share them with you. Because these are the 4 that just sort of jumped out, but I randomly chose them. Things like, you just don't think, do you? These are things we shouldn't say to our spouse. Or, that was stupid. Y'all giggle because you say it. You see, you're telling on yourself. All you ever do is think about yourself. And one on the list that I think is absolutely, has to be one of the worst. If you don't like it, yeah, you can just leave. We should never say that to our spouse. That hurts. That's damaging. If we want to have lasting intimacy, if we want to have a lasting closeness and connection with the one we love, don't invite them to leave the relationship. Don't say hurtful things. Learn to say the right things. And, Solomon and his bride-to-be, they knew the importance of saying right things. They knew what they should say to one another, and what they say serves as a guide for us. I mean, we can just follow right along their path, and we'll be saying the right things. And just to take their example. If you're following along with me in your notes, under this first point, write, admire your mate's attractiveness. They talked about how they were attracted to one another physically all the time, throughout the entire book. I mean, this is a recurring event, is their admiration for each other's physical appearance, their physical attractiveness. And it's not just something they feel, and it's not something they see, like I'm attracted to that visually, but this is something they say on a regular basis. In verse 15 we read, Solomon tells her, she is so beautiful. And her immediate response is, you're so handsome. They say these things to one another. Our mates need to know, and they need to hear that we're attracted to them. Especially, many times, our wives, guys. They need to hear that. Because women tend to struggle with self-esteem and self-worth and self-image much more than we do. And so time and time again, we see Solomon setting the example of admiring his bride-to-be's physical attractiveness. Because she even said back, if you back up into the chapter, chapter 1, verse 6, she says, don't stare at me, don't look at me, because I'm dark. I have neglected my garden, my vineyard. She's talking about her body. She's talking about her appearance. I don't want you staring at me. I don't want you looking at me because I don't feel pretty. And immediately, Solomon jumps on that. He says, no, I don't want you thinking that way. I don't want you feeling that way. I want to look at you because you're so beautiful. And over, he reminds her of how he sees her. And so that's important to our spouse. That's saying the right thing, how we admire their attractiveness. Another thing that they do that guides us is they appreciate one another's thoughtfulness. So Solomon, he begins to compliment her on her attractiveness, and she compliments him back. But not only does she say how handsome he is, but she adds to that, you're so charming. In other words, that was just so sweet of you to say. You know, I really needed to hear that today. That was an encouragement to me. And so she wants him to know that she appreciates those kind, encouraging, and affirming words. And she thanks him, not later, immediately. And she comments there in verse 16, after saying how handsome he is, she says, our bed is verdant, meaning it's green with grass, it's plush, it's healthy. If I might, I think that sort of an interpretation of this might be, it's her way of saying, I really appreciate what you just said. You know, that touched me. I thank you for it verbally now. When the time is right, I will thank you again. You know what I mean? Are you following me? Right? She knows what he wants to hear, and she's saying it. So appreciate that thoughtfulness and let him or her know that you heard it, right? Number 3, affirm your mate's uniqueness. If you believe they're special, tell them they are. So as we move out of chapter 1 into chapter 2, this dialogue between them continues to go back and forth, and they're admiring each other, and they're saying how beautiful and how handsome one another is, and are appreciative of their thoughtfulness and how sweet and encouraging each other is. But then in the later verses of the first part of chapter 2, they affirm one another's uniqueness. Like, there's no one in the world quite like you. She says in verse 1, I'm a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. And he responds, like a lily among thorns is my darling among the young women. Now, over the years, especially if you've been in church for any length of time, maybe you're familiar and you experience with some more traditional style churches where you sang hymns and stuff like that, you've probably heard Jesus at some point in time referred to as the Rose of Sharon. Or you may have sang an old hymn that spoke of him or sang of him as the Lily of the Valley. Which, hey, I've enjoyed that, I've heard that, and I can appreciate that. However, I want to point out something that I think might be a little more accurate. If the Song of Solomon is to be in some way sort of a type or figuratively representing Jesus' relationship with His church, His bride, then we need to pay attention and note that the words Rose of Sharon and Lily of the Valley don't apply to Jesus. Jesus, in the story, would be represented by Solomon. The church, his bride, would be represented by Shulamite. She's the one saying, I'm the rose of Sharon, the lily of the valley. His bride, the church, you and I, that's who it's referring to. And now when we read that and we see her describing herself as a rose, we might immediately think, wow, what a change of heart and mind she's had. I mean, in just a few verses, She's gone from, don't stare at me, don't look at me, I'm so ugly, I don't want anybody looking at me, to, I'm a rose. You know? It's like, wow. Now that's the power of words. There again, a more accurate translation would shed some light on this. Like, I'm not trying to throw off on those who translated from the original language to English because I couldn't have done it. But nowadays, we have much greater resources and tools to work with. And a better translation of the word rose would be common wildflower. What she's saying, I'm just a common flower in a meadow, in a pasture, or whatever. And he says, no, that's not the way you need to think and see yourself. You're not just some common wildflower. He says, my darling, you, verse 2, are like a lily, a lotus, a flowering blossom among thorns. In other words, sweetheart, you're not one of a million. You're the only one in a million. You are like a beautiful, blossoming, unique, and precious flower in a world of weeds. Do you understand me? There is no one like you. He's affirming her uniqueness. You see, that's how you ensure intimacy. I mean, this guy is on his game. Like, he's figured this thing out. And she is falling head over heels for him. You learn to say the right things. See, guys, I want you to understand that Solomon leads the way in this. Solomon sets the example. He affirms his wife. He learns to say the right things. Now, ladies, I want you to pay attention to this next part, because this is where she begins to lead and where she begins to set an example. He learns to say the right things, in which she will learn the same, but she sets the example in seeking to respond the right way. So that's the second thing we need to learn to ensure intimacy. Seek to respond the right way. Look what she said here in verses 3 through 6. He's just complimented her on her beauty and how unique she is. You, my darling, are a flower among thorns. You're a lone lotus in a poison ivy patch. You're the only one. And she says to him, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. Let him lead me to the banquet hall, and let his banner over me be love. Strengthen me with raisins, refresh me with apples, for I'm faint with love. His left arm is under my head, and his right arm embraces me. I think what this is saying is, ladies, if you enjoy the compliments that come from your husband, then don't act as if you didn't hear them. Don't act as if they've fallen on deaf ears. Don't let those compliments go unnoticed. Respond. Respond the right way. If you'll respond in kind, there's a great chance that those compliments will continue to come. I mean, I'm just speaking as a guy here. If we do something, and this is not just pertaining to marriage and relationships. This is how we operate in all of our life. If we do something and nothing beneficial comes from it, we don't do that anymore. Or we don't do it very long. If there is no fulfillment, if there's no satisfaction in that, we don't do that very long. However, if we do something, we're like puppies. We do something, and that's a behavior you like and you want to see repeated, treat it. Good boy. Right? And we'll do that over and over and over at command. Right? It'll happen. Respond the right way. And now, listen, as I've said time and time again, everything she says is laced with sexual innuendo. Like, you don't have to read into it. It's there. She knows what he likes. She knows what he wants to hear. She knows what his needs and desires are, and she just fuels that in anticipation. She knows how to speak his language, right? And so she just says the right thing to keep those compliments coming. Now, ladies, I'm not suggesting here that every compliment your husband gives you should lead to the bedroom. But now, every now and then, that wouldn't hurt, right? But you have to respond in some way, in some kind. And so she knows what her man likes to hear. And she's saying, I thank you, and I will thank you. And we're both going to receive pleasure. We're both going to enjoy this. And she knows what his desires are, and her desire is to fulfill those. And she's communicating that. We're not even married yet. And so that leads me to this final thought. If you want to ensure intimacy, and I'm going to speak directly to those of you who are single here, maybe you're not married yet, or you're single again, whatever the case may be. If you want to ensure intimacy in your relationship, your future relationship, determine to wait for the right time. Determined to wait for the right time. If I were to direct this entire section of the message toward married couples, I would say, give and reserve yourself for your spouse only. Give and reserve yourself for your spouse only. I mentioned this in the very first week. Anybody who says that the Bible's boring has never read the Song of Solomon, have they? Ever. They may not even know where to find it because there's nothing in here that's boring. It's pretty racy. It's pretty exciting. It's one of those books as you get into it, if you read it, you concentrate, and you go through it slowly and purposefully, you'll find yourself starting to beat up with a little sweat, looking over your shoulder, wondering if anybody's watching, thinking, should I really be reading this? But it's good. And so you can't stop. But not because of simply what it's saying and the content, but because of its truth. I mean, I find myself, as I watch this and read this and sort of picture in my mind what's going on, these two are blazing with desire for each other. And I read through it and I'm thinking, we're not even to the wedding. We're in the first 2 chapters. And at any moment, they're just going to rip their clothes off, right? I mean, I see it coming. It's like, what is about to happen here? But just when I think they are about to cross the line, you read something like verse 7, where she says, "Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires." See, she's speaking to her friends. She's speaking to those young women in the city. And she says, ladies, as bad as I want him, and as bad as I want to give myself to him, not yet. Now's not the time. Because I have made a vow of purity to my God and to my future husband. Now is not the time. Those of you who are married here, whether you've been married just a few months, 30, 40 years or more, think back to that day when you stood at an altar and you took a covenant. You made a vow. And that vow included purity and faithfulness to your spouse. Reserve and give yourself to him or her only. That's how you ensure intimacy. Solomon had this same wisdom, and he wrote in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1, he said, "For everything under the sun, every activity, there's a season, there's a time," right? For every activity. Even the activity talked about in the Song of Solomon, there's a time, there's a season for that. In verse 5, he said, there's a time to embrace, and there's a time to what? Refrain. Determine to wait for the right time. Sexual pleasure, marital intimacy is a good thing. It's a God thing. It's a blessed thing, but only in the right time, the right place, with the right person, in the right way, with the right motivation. Things have to be right. Any time is not the right time. Any person is not the right person. God has a set plan for your life. God wants you to experience all the good things and all the blessings that He has prepared for you. But trust His time. If you will trust His time, then satisfaction and fulfillment and pleasure will be your reward. If you ignore His time, then a lifelong sense of regret will be what you experience. Wait for God's time. Now, just like every week throughout this series, we're going to give you some homework, something to do this week to try to enhance your experience and your intimacy with your spouse, the one you love. If you're not married, choose someone that you care a great deal about and apply this in some form or fashion. Now, if you guys follow me on social media, on Twitter or Instagram, you know that my wife is killing it. Like she's going all out. I mean, setting the bar. Follow her example. And here's what I want you to do. Now, if you've missed any of the homework assignments before, go back. Start incorporating some of those. But this week, I want you to do 3 things. Like I said at the beginning of the message. Intimacy is not by accident. It doesn't happen by accident. It has to be on purpose. It has to be planned for. It has to be worked for. So this week, I want you to do 3 things on purpose. I want you to purposefully avoid doing or saying anything that would cause or continue an unnecessary conflict. Avoid doing or saying anything that would cause or continue an unnecessary conflict. Number 2, I want you to purposefully affirm your spouse verbally and directly, not only in private, but in public. That's what this couple did. They were constantly complimenting and affirming one another in the presence of other people. They wanted everybody else to know how they felt and what they thought about each other. And then number 3, if you're on the receiving end of that, acknowledge that affirmation and respond in kind. So if your wife or your husband affirms, compliments you in the presence of others, then immediately, don't wait till you get home, immediately acknowledge that affirmation and respond to it in like manner in front of those people. If it's in private, simply respond in like manner. Do those 3 things, and you'll be on your way to ensuring lifelong intimacy.